here in this darkness. I know what I've done. I know all at once who I am. I'm a bookkeeper's son. I don't want to shoot no one. Well, I crossed my old man back in Oregon. Don't take me alive. Got a case of dynamite. I could hold out here all night. Yes, I crossed my old man back in Oregon. Don't take me alive. I'm a bookkeeper's son. I don't want to shoot no one. Well, I crossed my old man back in Oregon. Don't take me alive. Got a case of dynamite. I could hold out here all night. Yes, I crossed my old man back in Oregon. Don't take me alive. Don't take me alive. If I had my way, I would move to another lifetime. I'd quit my job, ride the train through the misty nighttime. I'd be ready when my feet touch ground, wherever I come down. And if the folks will have me, then they'll have me. Any world that I'm welcome to, I say. Any world that I'm welcome to. Any world that I'm welcome to is better than the one I come from. I can hear your words when you speak of what you are and have seen. I can see your hand reaching out through a shining daydream, where the days and nights are not the same, captured happy in a picture frame. Honey, I will be there. Yes, I'll be there. Any world that I'm welcome to. Any world will do. Any world that I'm welcome to. Yes, I'm talking about any world. Any world that I'm welcome to is better than the one I come from. I got this thing inside me that's got to find a place to hide me. I only know I must obey this feeling I can't explain away. I think I'll go to the park, watch the children playing. Perhaps I'll find in my head what my heart is saying. A vision of a child returning, a kingdom where the sky is burning. Honey, I will be there. Yes, I'll be there. Any world that I'm welcome to. There's no lie. Any world that I'm welcome. Yes, I'm talking about any world. Any world that I'm welcome to is better than the one I come from.
Welcome everybody to Wakefield. We are here at OE Electrics. It's quite hard to say OE Electrics with my accent, but this is exactly the kind of innovative UK business and its workers that the Labour Party will continue to champion when in government. Here in Wakefield, when the mines and manufacturing industries were destroyed, the governments of the day did not do enough to save that industry or rebuild communities and provide good jobs. And we still see that same depressing pattern now in many places around the country. Boarded up shops, closed youth centres and sure sort centres, high streets empty or dominated by high interest, charity or betting shops. Alongside that, jobs are casualised and working lives have become plagued by low pay and insecurity. In Wakefield, people voted overwhelmingly to leave the EU. But that doesn't mean that Brexit is all they care about. Just like people everywhere, they want to live a happy, positive and comfortable life, which they feel they have control over. And under this government, that is almost impossible. While many in the Westminster bubble seem only able to focus on Brexit and the Leave Remain divide, we know that up and down the country, in the real world, there are crucial issues that we must address. Issues like child poverty becoming entrenched in the UK, families depending on food banks becoming the norm, universal credit creating insecurity, poverty and desperation. Issues so extreme that the United Nations said they're not just a disgrace, but a social calamity and an economic disaster. Let's remember that we live in the sixth richest country in the world. And yes, we have a divide between Leave and Remain, but we also have a divide between many who are struggling every single day and the wealthy who this government really works for. Our mission is to bring people together and to live a social and economic justice, and we need that now more than ever before. But to do that, we need a new government. Not only a government that will have a majority to negotiate the Jobs First Brexit deal our country needs, but a democratic, socialist government founded on and supported by a movement with direction and purpose. A government who will be dedicated to all of those forgotten communities, driven by an inspirational leader who will rebuild our country for the many and not the few. Ladies and gentlemen, you know as well as I do, we need a Labour government led by Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you for that introduction, and thank you all for being here today. And it's great to be here to welcome Laura back to Parliament from having her baby, who is here with us today. It's his first meeting, I believe, is that right? I'm sure he'll get to go to many more as his life develops. And I kind of thank Richard Bergen for being here as well and representing us so well on the media this morning. In fact, so well, the Tory Central Office has gone into overdrive in attacking Richard Bergen. Well done, Richard. It's a badge of honour. It's a pleasure to be here in Wakefield, and can I say a big thank you to OE Electrics and all the staff from OE Electrics for coming here this morning and giving us this facility to have this meeting. I'm looking forward to touring the factory afterwards. Excuse me. For we're now 2.5 years on from the EU referendum, and we are finally reaching the moment when the House of Commons will have its say on Theresa May's Brexit deal. In those 2.5 years, many of the most pressing problems facing people in their daily lives here in Yorkshire and across the country have been ignored or relegated to the back of the queue by a Conservative Party consumed by its own internal battles over Brexit. Years of Tory failure have left our society more divided than ever. Poverty is growing, homelessness is up, personal debt is rising, and crime is up. The truth is, the real divide in this country is not between those who voted to remain in the EU or those who voted to leave the EU. It's between the many who do the work, who create the wealth and pay their taxes, and the few who set the rules, reap the rewards, and so often dodge the taxes. The Conservative Party's main concern, as ever, is to protect the interests of the few, and is prepared to set everybody else against each other. Divide and rule is their style in order to stay in power. That's why at every turn during the Brexit negotiations, the Prime Minister has acted in ways that have exacerbated that division. In fact, her only success has been in bringing people together, has been to unite both people who voted leave and those who voted remain against her botched and damaging deal. Now she's facing the inevitable consequence of that failure, defeat in the House of Commons. Let there be no doubt, Theresa May's deal is a bad deal for our country, and Labour will vote against it next week in Parliament. And remember, the only reason Parliament is having what has now become known as the meaningful vote is because Labour secured that concession from the government. And I want to pay a big thanks and a huge tribute to Keir Starmer and his team for all the work they did in securing Parliament having the right to control what the government does in this. Keir, thank you very much for that work and that great achievement. If the government cannot pass its most important legislation, then there must be a general election at the earliest opportunity. A government that cannot get its business through the House of Commons is no government at all. It's lost its mandate, so must go to the country to seek another. And the government defeat on Tuesday, after the amendment put down by Yvette Cooper was passed, is the first time a government has been defeated on a finance bill since 1978. So I say this to Theresa May. If you're so confident in your deal, call the election and let the people decide. If not, Labour will table a motion of no confidence in the government at the moment we judge it to have the best chance of success. Clearly, Labour does not have enough MPs at the moment in Parliament to win a confidence vote on its own. So members across the House should vote with us to break the deadlock. This paralysis cannot continue. Uncertainty is putting people's jobs and livelihoods at risk. And if a general election cannot be secured, and we'll try, then we'll keep all options on the table, including the option of campaigning for a public vote. But an election must be and is the priority. It's not only the most practical option, it's also the most democratic option. It would give the winning party a renewed mandate to negotiate a better deal for Britain and secure support for it in Parliament and across the country. Defeat for the government's central policy on Tuesday would be historic. It would not only signal the failure of Theresa May's premiership, but the failure of the Conservative Party as a party of government. This is, after all, a party that for decades claimed to be the natural party of government, a safe bet for the country. That's what they used to tell us. Now we see the reality. They don't know what they're doing. They've led us from chaos to crisis. They have no answers or legislation to fix the many crises of their own making, whether it's the cost of living, housing, personal debt, or escalating inequality, rising crime, or collapsing public services. And I pay tribute to Peter Box and the local council to here today, doing their best to deliver services while their funding has been slashed by central government. But there are solutions to these crises, and Theresa May's botched Brexit deal is not the only deal possible. It's a deal that reflects the kind of country that the Tories want to create. It should be no surprise that this Tory deal allows workers' rights and environmental protections to fall behind minimum European basic standards. The government boasts that this will give the UK flexibility. But flexibility for whom? Flexibility for employers to exploit workers? Flexibility for big corporations to pollute our environment? Flexibility for multinational giants to undercut our neighbours and drive down standards everywhere. Meanwhile, Theresa May's refusal to countenance negotiating a new customs union is based on the Tory dream of a sweetheart trade deal with Donald Trump, which could deliver chlorinated chicken to our dinner tables and open up our National Health Service to giant profit-seeking American healthcare corporations. Labour has a very different set of priorities because we represent the interests of the many, not the few. We've given voice to policies that do command majority public support, but the political class has refused to endorse, such as fair taxation and new forms of public ownership. When Labour goes into government, we will support new high-tech industries that will provide high-wage, secure jobs, like this wonderful company we're at here today. And we will bring real investment and prosperity to areas such as Yorkshire and the Midlands, to Scotland and Wales, which for too long have been held back by successive governments. And so, the alternative plan that Labour set out for a sensible Brexit deal that could win broad support is designed to enable us to fulfil those ambitions whilst respecting the democratic result of the referendum. Any political leader who wants to bring the country together cannot wish away the votes of 17 million people who wanted to leave. Any more, they can ignore the concerns of the 16 million who voted to remain. I know people are genuinely scared of the prospect of no deal. I meet people who are frightened and going through real stress. And I want to take this opportunity to thank all European Union nationals who've enriched our society and made their homes here and made such a fantastic contribution to our industries and services. With Labour, your future here is secure. I know many people were appalled by the bigotry and racism that some politicians stoked during the referendum campaign and are still trying to exploit. Out of the small number of desperate refugees risking their lives to cross the English Channel, let's never forget that whatever circumstances people are living in, whether in tents or camps or trying to survive on dangerous dinghies, everyone is a human being, and we must reach out the hand of humanity in all circumstances. And that is exactly what Labour's Home Affairs team does, so well led by Diane Abbott, who's taken that fight to the Tories for justice and humanity. People want to live in a country that's tolerant, that's diverse, that's open. We won't let that openness, that generosity be crushed. Let's not lower our horizons, let's raise them up. I also know that in many places, like Wakefield, people feel they've been ignored. They've lost industries, as Laura pointed out, and no one seemed to care. They've been robbed of their future by a lack of investment and underfunding of public services. These are proud, generous communities that pull together and support each other. Communities that have real pride in their towns, in their regions. But they know they could be so much more. I understand that. Many of them want to send their politicians a message in the referendum, and I hear that message. Labour is the party of the working class, and we'll stand up for all communities all across the UK. That's why our alternative plan prioritises jobs, growth and rights. That's why we've called for a new customs union with a British say in future trade deals, a strong single market relationship and a guarantee to keep pace with EU rights and standards. Combined with the election of a radical Labour government, our alternative plan will allow us to make the fundamental changes that are so badly needed in our country, whilst respecting those who voted both Leave and Remain. Why is a customs union necessary? It's because a new customs union and a radical Labour government with an active industrial strategy will allow a renaissance in our manufacturing sector, which will create good, secure jobs and help restore pride and prosperity to parts of our country that have been ignored for far too long, that have seen no investment for decades. Why do we need a strong relationship with the single market? It's because frictionless trade and a radical Labour government with a plan to invest in every region and nation of our country will give us the chance to kickstart real growth in the economy, allowing the wealth created by this country's workforce to be shared more fairly. Finally, we're absolutely insistent on at least keeping pace with EU rights at work and environmental standards and consumer protections. It's because with these guarantees and a radical Labour government that stands up for people against powerful vested interests, we can give workers and consumers more control over their lives. The alternative deal Labour has proposed is radical, practical and achievable, and clearly has the potential to command majority support in Parliament. But it's not an end in itself. The task of the Labour Party and the Labour movement is the long overdue transformation of our country. We'll bring people together by addressing the deep-seated common problems across our country and fulfilling the aspirations that led people to vote both Leave and Remain. I'd like to put it like this. If you're living in Tottenham, you may well have voted Remain. You've got high bills. You've got rising debts. You're in insecure work. You struggle to make your wages stretch, and you may be on universal credit and forced to access food banks. You are up against it. If you're living in Mansfield, you're more likely to have voted to Leave. You've got high bills, rising debts, you're in insecure work. You struggle to make your wages stretch, and you may be on universal credit and forced to access food banks. You're up against it. But you're not against each other. People across the country, whether they voted Leave or Remain, know that the system isn't working for them. Some see the European Union as a defence against insecurity and hostility. Others see the EU as part of an establishment that plunged them into insecurity and hostility in the first place. But it's the failed system, rigged against the many to protect the interests of the few, that is the real cause of inequality and insecurity, whether you live in Tottenham or Mansfield or indeed any other part of our country. And the real solution is to transform Britain, to work in the interests of the vast majority by challenging the entrenched power of a privileged elite. That's how we can help to overcome our country's divisions. Because for both sides, the EU referendum was about much more than our relationship with our biggest trading partner and its rules. It was about what has happened to our people over decades and how to build a better future. The Conservatives are never going to tackle the burning injustices of our country or act to overcome the deep and growing inequalities. They're incapable of leading us out of a crisis that they have created. Britain deserves a government that can govern. The need for a government with a clear purpose and direction for the country could not be more urgent. A general election is the right answer and the best way to break the deadlock. Labour is ready to bring Leave and Remain voters together to rebuild Britain for the many, not the few. Thank you.
So we are going to take some questions now for Jeremy to answer. So if you could just indicate if you do have a question, and I'll try and get as many people in as possible. And we're going to take them in rounds of 3. So we'll take 3 questions and then Jeremy will answer those points. Shall we have Dave Higgins from the Press Association? Is the Press Association here?
Wow.
Brilliant.
Oh, yeah. We thought you hadn't come.
Sorry, I didn't know you guys were going to be called, to be honest, this early. If you do get the general election that you want, what will Labour's policy be in the general election towards Brexit?
Okay. Can you just keep your hand up so I can see? Okay, thank you. I'll take you, yeah. Pippa? Is it Pippa, yeah?
Pippa Carrera from the Daily Mirror. The government finally seems to be offering Labour MPs an olive branch on workers' rights. Would you accept it and back the Flint and Mann amendment? And more broadly, is there anything that Theresa May could offer Labour at this stage, such as a general election, that could take you over the line and persuade you and Labour to support her deal?
Thank you. And a final question before. Okay. Have we got anyone from the Independent here? Yeah. Yeah.
Hi, Lizzie Buckham from the Independent. Do you agree with the Shadow Brexit Secretary that extending Article 50 may well be inevitable?
Okay, thanks for those questions. The policy on Brexit we put forward is one of negotiation around a customs union, around protection of rights at work, consumers and environment, and not allowing our workers' rights standards to fall below those of Europe, which is implicit in what the government's own legally binding document suggests would be put forward. And so our policy would be to negotiate urgently with the EU as and when we take office, but clearly a general election must come first in order to do that. Policy making is made by the Labour Party in a democratic form, and that policy will be put together and put into a manifesto in any election that's coming up. On the question of the Daily Mirror on workers' rights that was made yesterday by the Prime Minister, I think it was yesterday, it's already been quite clearly and emphatically rejected by the TUC and leading trade unions. They say it simply doesn't guarantee the protections that we are seeking. And indeed, a Labour government, and we will have a Ministry of Labour, and the spokesperson for the Ministry of Labour is right here next to me, are very, very clear that there will be very much enhanced workers' rights under a Labour government, including rights at work from beginning your employment rather than waiting an overlong period for it. And there will be protections on the rights to organise, and there will be sectoral bargaining brought back. There's a whole lot of things we'll be doing as a Labour government on workers' rights. Now, we don't endorse or accept what's been put forward, and we agree with the TUC and the other General Secretaries that have already rejected that view. Keir has made it clear that obviously Article 50 has been triggered, and we voted to trigger Article 50 because it was a reflection of the result of the referendum. Quite clearly, moving into office at a period right up against the clock, there would need to be time for that negotiation. So what Keir was doing was reflecting the practicalities of how that negotiation would be undertaken.
I think we'll take another round of three questions. So just keep your hands raised so I can we have Nick? Is it Nick Martin? It's just there, yeah.
I just wonder what people sitting at home might think of this. That it does seem that Mr. Starmer was intimating a bit more than what you've just said, and that there seems to be a bit of confusion or split as to whether you think, as the leader, it's right or time to consider extending Article 50. I mean, what do you think?
Okay. We'll take another question first. I'm from the BBC. We'll have the BBC.
Hello. If Theresa May loses the meaningful vote next week, will you commit to calling a vote of no confidence in the government immediately?
Okay, we'll take one more. We'll go for John at Sky. Sorry, ITV. Sorry, John. Yeah.
We're getting your broadcasters mixed up.
I don't really know many people in the media.
Our region voted 58 to 42 to leave, and I suspect those that did vote to leave didn't think we'd still be here 2.5 years later groping in the dark. If you say the best practical option is a general election, you can't do that and then negotiate a deal with the EU before March the 29th. That's just another letdown, isn't it, to those people who did actually vote to leave?
Okay, thanks for your questions. No, there is no split on this. Keir and I are here together today. He made it clear the practicalities of negotiating, which is also the question that came from Sky on this, that an extension would be a possibility, and because clearly there has to be time to negotiate. The point you make from Sky about 58-42 leave, yes, that was the vote and that was the result in this area, and indeed in many other areas it was even bigger than that. Also in other parts of the country it was huge majorities to remain. It's this government that after 2.5 years, their unbelievable levels of incompetence, because they started off looking for a blunt exit. They then started saying they would negotiate, and now they are actively countenancing the idea of crashing out of the European Union on the 29th of March with no deal whatsoever, and the chaos that would follow as a result of that. We have voted against no deal and said there has to be a deal. This deal is not acceptable, therefore there has to be a space and time for further negotiations of it, and we've made that very, very clear indeed. The vote that will take place next week could well be the third defeat in a week for this government. They lost a vote yesterday in the House of Commons on the ability of the Commons to require the Prime Minister to come back and make a statement 3 days after the defeat has taken place. They also lost a vote on the finance bill. And don't forget, only a month ago they were found to be in contempt of Parliament by their own actions. This is a government that cannot command a majority in the House of Commons. We will move a motion of no confidence in the government at a time of our choosing when we judge the best chance would be success in doing that, because we do not have confidence in this government, and we honestly believe that the best way forward is a general election. I hear what you say about the time since the referendum, but I think everyone in this country would say this is a government that didn't win a majority in the general election anyway, cannot command a majority in the House of Commons, brings very little legislation forward because it can't get it through, and is losing unprecedented numbers of votes. This political chaos cannot go on. The only way forward, the only way out of it would be a general election that people can decide which MPs they wanted, which party they wanted to be in government, and what the priorities of that government would be. And I've set out our priorities, which would be to invest in all parts of our country, to reduce the hideous levels of inequality within our country, and invest in a future for all, particularly all young people within our society. That is what we offered in the 2017 election, and that is what we'll be offering in any general election whenever it comes.
Thank you. We'll take one more round of three if we've got any questions from anyone. And we'll take you at the back, yeah. You know, take you at the back, sorry, yeah.
Hello, Jessica Elgott from The Guardian. Mr Corbyn, many of your members will be hoping that any future Labour manifesto in a snap election would promise a second referendum. But do you have personal reservations about the signal that that would send to Labour voters here, many of whom voted leave in areas like Wakefield?
And another round. Any more questions on this side, perhaps? No? I'll take you, yeah.
Can I offer you my name?
I know your name, don't worry. We might get to you. I think we have got time for one more question.
Yeah, my engineering business in Sheffield exports the majority of its products, like the company here. And actually most people, I think, are just wanting to get this done and sorted. I think I'd like to know what you think is so bad about the current deal, which many people think is the best deal on offer, that you want to frustrate that. rather than just getting over the line so we can actually get on with our lives and, as you rightly say, get on with other things that are important for our country as well.
Thank you very much. Go on, one last question.
Mr. Corbyn,
There's a mic behind you.
Channel 4 News have gathered a large number of young people tonight who were too young to vote at the referendum but are now old enough to vote. Latest polling suggests that 2/3 of them want a second referendum, 87% of them want to remain. Have you forgotten young people?
Thanks for the questions that have come up. The point raised by The Guardian about members and second referendum, our conference agreed unanimously a very comprehensive motion on the European Union, which was a sequential series of events, which was to oppose this deal because we do not believe it delivers for the people of this country, and it puts us into a potential backstop arrangement from which there is no escape. It would be a one-sided treaty, and we'd be forced to accept anything thrown at us as a result of that. And after that defeat, we would then call for a general election, and we'd keep all options on the table, including a popular vote. And that's an option on the table, and that policy making has to be done by the party. I understand the point you're making from a friend from Sheffield about trade arrangements. Under the current proposals, if we go into a no-deal situation, then clearly there is enormous levels of chaos, and the government's preparations for this, including hiring a company to run ferries that doesn't actually own any ferries, and apparently the first one they've chartered isn't going to be available till April anyway, and the chaos that will come from that is huge. But to accept Theresa May's deal would actually lock us into a process that is not a good one and would not guarantee future trade or investment, in my view. The point that John makes about young people, I am very well aware of the views of young people across this country on wanting an education system that is free and accessible to them, that they want to have a guarantee of good quality training, apprenticeships and jobs, and that is what a Labour government with its investment strategy would deliver. I fully understand their wishes and their support for Remain, and indeed their wishes for a referendum to bring that about. I also understand those communities that voted against. The whole point of the speech I've made today is that you can bring communities together on a policy of social justice, on a policy of investment, on a policy of bringing this country together. This government has failed to do that. This government has promoted division when they could have promoted unity. They've shown their incompetence at negotiating. They've been looking over their shoulders all the time to do sweetheart trade deals with other people, all of which would involve cutting workers' rights, consumer rights and environmental protections, and lead us into becoming some kind of offshore tax haven of Europe. The Labour way is very, very different. We will vote against this deal on Tuesday. We will, if we're successful in defeating it, then be calling for a general election so the people of this country can decide the direction in which they want to go. An inclusive society that cares for all, that deals with injustices and inequalities, that invests in the future, or one that carries on with the same old, tax avoidance, tax evasion at the top, and poverty at the other end. I do not want to live in a country where so many people have to rely on food bags. I don't want to live in a country where thousands of fellow citizens sleep on our streets at night because we've so denuded our local authorities of the powers to build and invest in communities for the future. I want to live in a country that cares for all, not just the few. That is the Labour way, and that's what we'll put forward in the Commons next week, and we'll put it forward in a general election with pride and with pleasure as soon as that opportunity arises. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jeremy.